All right, so my acro frame is almost good and finished and ready to go. The prototype shipment has already been for sale and sold out like in 30 minutes. And I really have to thank you guys and thank my followers just for following me and just paying attention. I really do enjoy you guys a lot. And I really don't, I work all day, so I don't really pay attention to these things anymore, and I just do whatever I do for fun. And I didn't notice the amount of following that I have as of lately, and pretty much any product that I endorse or put up, I can't even believe that it just sells out kind of immediately. I have no hand in any of this stuff. I'm not trying to do anything. I just do this stuff for fun. So I really just thank you guys for just paying attention to me at all. That being said, I'm going to go over the thought process and the features that I have in this frame. This is the 5th time that I'm recording this video, trying to keep it under like 20 minutes, but I could just talk for days about this frame and just generally about my frame designs. So I have been working on this frame for a solid 10 months or 11 months, maybe almost a year, and I've tried every single geometry I could think of for acrobatics or anything until I arrived at this frame design. Now, I know it kind of looks like a pretty typical design, an alien style build or blackout style build or any kind of, general setup with the GoPro and the battery on top, but to me this really does fly optimally for acrobatics, and I really have tailored this frame to myself. The only real reason why it's for sale is because I feel like whatever I actually do, like flying, it actually does perform well, and probably people would want to fly it as well. So that's why it's for sale, and it's for sale for $44.99. So let's go over why the frame is what it is, why it looks like what it is. First and foremost, it is 91 grams as seen here, and I did make some last minute adjustments that did add 6 grams to it. It was 85 grams before. This version here is actually 85 grams, the frame, and the things that I changed about it were I made it 2 millimeters longer on the base and the top. I made the front section 1 millimeter longer, and I added 6 millimeter wide standoffs that we had custom made for it, just because it only has 6 standoffs. Let's give you 6 millimeter wide for a little bit extra beefcake in there, make you feel a little bit better, even though it doesn't really do anything. And that added a bunch of extra weight. So let's go over the geometry. The geometry of this frame is pretty close to an X. It is not an X. It is actually 9 millimeters wider than it is long. I think it's 9 millimeters, might be 9 or 10 millimeters. 9 millimeters wider than it is long. That being said, the overall length of the frame, if you look at the prop spacing front to back, is long enough so that you do get the kind of long frame effect when you fly around, and that's based off my race frame testing from a while back ago. So I did keep it at the minimum. I like small frames. I do not like big frames. Big frames have a higher tendency to break. They tend to weigh more and they're more cumbersome. I just don't like big frames, and they're less aerodynamic as well. What allowed me to get the geometry and the size to, I think it's 232 millimeters, that small, is because the front standoffs are now 27 millimeters wide. And way back when I started making acro frames, I realized that I was restricted by the width of the lens, really. That was what governed the size of the rest of the frame, because that lens had to fit between those standoffs, or like between the top plate and the standoffs. But now that we have micro cameras, that's not really a constriction anymore, but the micro camera is so darn small that it does need to move really far forward in the frame, like this. So you'll see that this camera mount that I'm using is a camera mount from Brain 3D. It's not the one that shipped in the prototype shipment. It's just one that he made. I mean, this guy like thinks about 3D prints all day long. All these prints are from him, Brain 3D. He really does an awesome job, really awesome job. And this design of his, which is just a press fit, it really does work fantastic. But unfortunately, it doesn't fit all the micro cameras, so we can't really make it the standard shipping mount. This is the mount that's actually shipping with the prototype version. It's the sling mount. It actually is made to fit a 30 millimeter spacing, but it also fits a 27 millimeter, and it works out fine. So the camera has to sit really far forward in order for you to get a proper amount of angle on it, so you don't run it, so you don't see your GoPro when you're flying around. But that 3 millimeter narrower standoff spacing allowed me to get like 9 grams knocked off the frame. The whole frame is a little bit narrower because of that spacing. And on top of that, you'll see how close the props come to the top plate. In fact, there were some prototypes where it was just scraping the top plate. And that's what I want. I want my tolerances to be super duper tight. And it just let me get a really smaller setup. Okay, so battery and GoPro on top. That performs the best to me. If you've been watching my previous videos, you'll know that I have this idea of the disc unloading, which you have to have some clearance in the middle of your frame to allow the air to flow inside the frame as well, because when the props do spin, they're not just blowing air down, they're blowing air sideways as well. And if you do have your battery and your GoPro right in the middle of your prop line, it's going to flow the air directly into the battery and GoPro, and you lose the fine control of your quad. And the number of designs that I tested that had that, they just didn't have that fine control I was looking for. Yeah, you can compensate with some rates, but you can't get it right. And the motors are always working a little bit harder to manage the props because you don't have that space in the middle of the frame. So very specifically, the frame sits on 23 millimeter standoffs, which puts the top deck just about a millimeter above a 2207 or a 7 millimeter height motor, which is what I recommend for the frame, is a 7 millimeter height motor. Or you can run 24, you can run whatever you want. I prefer the 7 millimeter height, 22 or 23 width. And also so that it clears the battery height. You'll notice the battery shelf or the battery deck back here sits definitely above the props because you don't want to chop up your battery. And I have two top plates that are shipping with the prototype order, which people that are watching this that did order the prototype, you will get these two top plates. One is the longer one with the shelf, and then I made the shorter one because people were crying about why it has a shelf off the back. And when you do get it, you'll probably notice that you want to run the one with the shelf, even though it weighs 0.8 grams more. This is the one I prefer, and in the next order, this is the one that's going to be standard. But if people really do prefer this one, I'll move to this one for all future orders. That being said, let's discuss that shelf. Alien style builds of way back when, or blackout style builds of way back when, had the fuselage right in the middle, centered, and it was, straight front to back. You had just as much space in the front and the back. And now our electronics are 100% different, and we don't need that much space anymore. We don't need as much room. So why do you need the back anymore? Just chop it off. And so I chopped it off for two reasons. Firstly, because I wanted to make the front longer so that I can get the GoPro out of the view of the props. And with 5-inch props and a at least 30 or 35 degree GoPro mount, you don't see any props in view, even though I kind of like props in view, but you don't see any props in view. So the front section is a little bit longer, and the back section is not there because it's lighter and because I wanted to get stuff out from the middle of the rear props. When you're flying around these things, no matter what you do, the front props are always interfering with the rear props, either starving them for air or blowing their thrust down and interfering with the thrust coming off the rear prop disc. And that's an effect that you can't get around. No matter how big you make the frame, reasonably big, you'll always have that annoying effect. And so if you have less stuff in the back here, you at least give the rear props a little bit more room to do their job. And what I actually noticed is that it really did help with prop wash a little bit more because the rear props were a little bit more effective. They had less stuff to run into in the middle of the frame. Just worked out better. So that's why the rear of the frame is chopped off. You don't need it. I did add the shelf so that when you do run a high GoPro tilt like this is 40 degrees tilt, which is a little bit higher than I like. I usually like 30 degrees or less even. When you run this high tilt, you don't have enough space on the top shelf to put like a 1600 and 1800 milliamp pack. And even though the frame is definitely not made for long range, I do not recommend this frame for long range. It is not made for long range, although I know people will use it for that because this is the 6-inch version. It does have the 6-inch arms. Now at least you have some room for a longer battery or a bigger battery, and you can even let some of it hang off the back and it's okay. So the other reason why the fuselage is moved forward is because if you cannot have the CG directly between the props, you want to have the CG a little bit in front of the props if it's above or below the prop line. That's why when you run race squads, you slide your battery forward. If it's a bottom mount battery, it balances the frame correctly in the air. And when we're flying around, we almost never fly, we're never in a hover. We're always at an angle. We're always at a little bit of an angle. So the frame, when you're flying, it balances at an angle like this. So it feels more natural when you're moving forward. It feels like you have more control. You have this really fine tactile control when you're cruising around. And it's what I prefer. So that's why the frame is how it is. All right, let's talk about the arm design in general or the rest of the frame. So the arm design is very specific. The end of the arms, this bumper is my bumper style, which works fantastic. It's been beefed up. The whole thing has been beefed up. This is a major fracture point here, right here. Get my pointer. This is a major fracture point right here, which I have beefed up kind of a lot. A lot. And so you probably won't see this point fracturing off the 90-degree angle that's made by the motor base and the arm. And the other fracture point, which is really the weakest point of this frame, is right here, where the arm connects to the main body. And that point is somewhere where really no frame can protect against. The only real way I could protect is to make the center section, the middle part, like super wide, which I really wasn't willing to do because it just adds a bunch of weight and it blocks thrust. It's just not a good idea. So instead, what I've done is I've made it a little bit wider to give it a little bit more room, and I've also put these little extensions on the edge of the base plate right here. And what these extensions do is they actually move the fulcrum point a little bit out into the arm. So I did break, I think, one arm, and I've stressed like a bunch of others. I've turned them into noodles, like a couple others. And what tends to happen when you do break arms on a frame like this with the battery and GoPro on top, with the weight on top, is that when you tumble out of a tree or something and you fall like 50, 60 feet and you land directly on the corner of the arm like this, you'll see it flexes the arm, and this is the weakest point of the arm, because you have this big mass on one side and you have this force on the other side. And so when you come down, you have this big mass that, smashes down, and it wants to keep going straight. It doesn't want to rotate. So when you have this fulcrum point further out on the arm, and this section over here by the standoff is stronger, it makes it more strong, and it allows the frame to actually rotate when it gets hit, rather than just maintain its momentum and then crack the arm right there. So when you hold the frame and you flex it this way versus you flip it over and flex it this way, you'll notice that the top ways, it's just slightly, you can definitely feel it, but it's just slightly more durable. It's not durable, more stiff and rigid. So you'll notice that the bottom plate here, let me get my pointer again. The bottom plate brace here, it doesn't have that little extension on it because it doesn't need it. Because if you do come down in a crash and you land upside down like this, because you have all the weight on top, it's much easier for the frame to pivot and rotate. So you're going to move, and the arm is not going to be in a bad place to break. So you're not going to get a lot of pressure on the bottom plate here. You will get a lot of pressure on the top plate here. That's why it has some extension on top, and I didn't put the extension on the bottom, and that saved me about 0.75 grams, 3/4 of a gram. Really have tailored every single gram on this frame. You'll also notice that the main deck is 2 millimeters, and the 2 millimeter is very specific because my original prototype was actually a 3 millimeter main deck, because I was just like, I don't want to have my front section cracking off like an alien or anything else. I'm just going to make it 3 millimeters and never have to worry about that again. Well, I've gone back to 2 millimeters because 3 millimeters is just too heavy. No matter how frail and thin and light I tried to make the base, it was just too heavy. And now I have this big, meaty, massive base, and it actually weighs like 7 grams less than the 3 millimeter version, even though it's much, much bigger, much more surface area than the 3 millimeter version. So 2 millimeter it is, but I had to do other stuff to strengthen it and just brace it in general, and that's what this brace underneath is. It not only strengthens the arm, but it also braces the rest of the frame. Now, my concept of frame designs is not really independent pieces. I'm not just bolting arms to a piece of carbon. We've come a long way since then. I really designed the frame to work together. That means that the frame has to be actually built together, all the pieces bolted together for it to properly work. So if you take off the top plate and you try to flex it and bend it around and move it, you'll notice that it actually has a lot more flex in it, you'll feel like the center of the plate is being very stressed. But I have cut about 20, 30 different versions, at least 20, 30 different versions of this frame. And so I've tailored the flex of the frame and the way it actually bends. And when you do flex it in the hand, you'll notice that the frame actually flexes all together. So you're not going to get any particular joint or section of the arm or body or anything that's taking most of the load of the flex. You'll notice that the whole frame flexes in a U shape. And I've done that very specifically because in my experimentation, this is not scientific, that tends to do better for vibrations. So I'm getting less vibrations on this particular flex profile as I am on my other designs that had a stiffer flex profile or didn't have these little extensions on the arms and didn't have other things. And the only way I really have to test this is I took this build, which you'll see is really a messy build at this point because it's really been just damaged. It's been built up onto like 25 different frames. So I've thrown this build across frames because this is a particularly noisy build. And I landed on this kind of geometry and this kind of setup because it tends to manage those vibrations a lot better. Now, it really is only one build, but it is my noisiest build, so it tends to work out on the geometry. So I really am proud of that aspect because I probably put the most effort into that. Other things about the frame is that you'll see the arms on the inside actually butt up against each other, so there's no more wiggly arms. I know people complain a lot about that of the Floss 2. There's an update coming to the Floss 2 that will solve the wiggly arm problem. And so there was one reviewer that actually said that this joint where the arms butt up against each other is really small. And yeah, it is small, because why do you need more? Like, it just didn't make sense to me. I don't need to add any more weight there. And the arms shape, now that you can see, the inside section is wide enough such that when you do get hit like this, you're not going to break the carbon over here, and it butts up against the other side. So everything's kind of working together, and everything works great together. Yeah, I don't know why you'd need any more than that. If you look at the center of this frame, the fuselage, these standoffs are really, really wide apart, and you have all this room to build with. There's so much room on this frame. You can access everything from this frame, and it's really, really nice and convenient to build, because there's just so much darn room to play with in there. The bolts for the arms are moved kind of farther away from your stack. This is the one that's using, I only use the Asgard or the Kamikaze boards anymore, the all-in-one boards, and I've designed it specifically to fit the all-in-one boards, and the all-in-one boards clear the bolts, just barely clear the bolts. The rear bolts are really easy to reach. You can reach those with a set of pliers or tweezers, and you can just grab it and unscrew it. The front bolts are a little bit more annoying, but you can still reach them with a set of pliers to unscrew them if you do need to change an arm. So arm swaps are really not that big of a deal. Another thing you'll notice is that I don't use press nuts or countersunk screws or anything special on any of my frame designs, because I really like standard hardware. I do not want people to have to go out and find specific hardware if they lose a screw or something. That being said, I do definitely recommend you Loctite all of your screws on your frame, because they do unscrew and come loose from time to time. At least if you've played with them a whole bunch and now they're all loosey-goosey. Particularly, I would Loctite these 4 screws. You'll notice that I'm not using lock nuts underneath the standoffs, because it's not necessary anymore with the design that I have on the base plate. Even though the lock nuts would help the screws from not loosening, I really only have one frame that has lost one screw once, but just Loctite your screws. It will help just keep things firm and strong. Gives you more peace of mind. You don't have to worry about it. There's an antenna loop on the side here. It doesn't really add much weight or any weight at all. It fits an SMA connector, which is becoming antiquated, although I don't know how I'm going to mount the more recent MMCX connectors. It is a little bit of an issue because the MMCX is really small, and you kind of don't want to have an MMCX to MMCX or MMCX to SMA and have to deal with that, because what's the point of MMCX anymore? So somebody's going to have to make some sort of a mount, stock something to hold the MMCX antennas. And the reason I really say that is because, all right, so the antenna is mounted low like this because you won't break your frame, and you won't break the stock anymore because it's so low on the frame. I've never broken a single piece of frame because my antenna has bent out of the way. And in fact, I just smashed the crap out of this one this morning, and it just bent like crap. It would have cracked the frame if it was like in the top plate, which is like lesson number 1 of frame design. Back when the Luminaire frames were coming out, they had that hole in the top plate that would just crack, if you just tumbled. So it's a really good mount, but you do need a little bit longer antenna to properly clear your battery, especially if you're doing like long range stuff. You want to have your antennas like really high up. You want to have them really far out. So 2 things I need to have created is somebody's got to 3D print like a tube holder, antenna tube holder that's really long for the Crossfire antenna to be vertical, because it's supposed to be vertical, or at least like a little bit like a 30-degree tilt back. It needs to be straight up, far away from everything, so that it gets the clearest view of your control signal coming to it. And we also need somebody to make the MCX holders to hold the antenna up far away from everything else, because that's why I'm saying this is not a long range frame, because it's got too much stuff, general stuff in the way. On top of that, for long range, you really want your battery to be underneath, because you want to load up a really big beefy battery, and you're not really doing crazy tricks, so it's okay to have a bottom mount battery, and it's not really going to affect you much. And it also allows you to put your antennas and everything on top far, far, far away from everything else, so that you have super clear view, super clear signal. Also, the frame was designed to be a 5-inch frame. It is not designed to be a 6-inch or a 7-inch frame. That being said, I will probably make 7-inch arms for it, and 6-inch arms also already exist. The reason I say it's a specifically 5-inch frame is because you'll notice that as you change the prop size up, the spacing between front and back actually becomes narrower. So once I go to 7-inch, it'll become even narrower than that. And this 5-inch version is already like only 5 or 6 millimeters longer than what I think is the minimum width between front and back you need to have proper clearance of the prop wash and all that other stuff. So 6-inch works great on it because, you know, 6-inch will, I mean, props work, whatever, they'll work, but it's not optimal for 6-inch, it's optimal for 5-inch. If I haven't alluded to this yet, the frame is really designed for kind of low speed, non-Matty stunt style freestyle, and it's just made for that. It's not really made for long range, it's not really made for 6-inch, it's not made for 7-inch, it's not made for anything else. It's made for a very specific kind of freestyle, the Johnny Sher, Mr. Steele kind of normal or not the crazy kind of stuff. You can use the race, of course, you can do whatever you want with it, but that's specifically what I have made it for, and that's where it excels at. That's the frame. I mean, I could talk for days about the whole patterning that I've done here to, you know, compensate for the flex and also strengthen the carbon, you know, using square holes does help the carbon stay strong rather than using round holes. It also keeps it lighter as well. You do have you have even flex throughout the frame. It's stronger in the arm sections because it's stronger in the arm section. These two holes in the back are not used at all. They actually made them for the 3D print guys because I expect them, even though I don't really recommend it, I expect somebody to make some 3D print stuff that holds stuff sticking out the back here because people tend to like sticking their antennas down there for some weird reason. And yeah, that's it. I'm going to leave it at that. I think I've talked long enough. Feel free to ask all the questions you have in the comment section below. I'm happy to answer all the questions I can get to. That's the frame. It will probably be tweaked from here on. It's not really, you're not really going to see a really big change to anything really. All of my frames are really alive. I really do listen to feedback and I see how people break the stuff, and I really do change sections of the frame here and there to try and help and compensate for those kinds of breaks and just try to improve the frame over time. So everything I make is really an alive product. And last but not least, you'll notice that there's only one side for the battery strap holes, and the reason for that is because it's annoying to weave your battery strap through two sets of holes, which I don't know why I ever did on the Floss 2. It was just a dumb thought. Yeah, that's about it. Don't forget to floss. Flossing is very important. Thanks very much for watching.